that's an issue, we're gonna just like celebrate that for a moment. So here we go. We'll get back. So on our call today, we are going to be talking about how we unpacked all of your state standards in math. And I wanted to let you know that we did create a product called the Comprehensive Standards Guides. And I want you to see the authors that are the creators of those comprehensive standards guides. And a few of them are with us today. So what you're going to notice on the calls, you're going to hear from Constance Hallemeyer. She was our math expert at one of the math experts at the secondary level, and Dr. Sherry Lorton, another math expert at the elementary level. They're joining us today, and they'll be talking about specifics to those levels as we go through this process today. We also have with us today our Dr. Stephanie Brenner, and she was one of the authors, and she's going to be the moderator today. She'll be keeping track of the chat and what's happening in there and just like pausing me if we need to pause and reminding me of things as we go through today. We also have special guests with us. Well, we have our co-founder, Aaron Hepburn. He's our COO, so he's with us today. And then Connie Holmes with us, and she is our AA. She's taking notes so that we'll have notes available that we can share with all of you. Then we have our special visitors today from BK Education Resources. We had Beth Daniels. So Beth, can you just like shout out? Beth's on the road.
Hey, everybody. Great to see so many faces.
Yeah. And then we have Erin Steidley from BK Ed Resources. So both are your Iowa representatives and they work with us they represent us at Compass PD in the state of Iowa.
Hi, everybody.
So,
See you.
Yeah.
Carrie.
If you didn't know, Beth is going to be retiring and Erin will be taking care of all of Iowa all on her own. So that's a lot of people to take care of, right?
Yep, and we're gonna miss Beth so much, but she'll still be around. Thank God. Yeah.
Thank goodness. So we're grateful. So Compass PD is an organization like I had mentioned earlier, that is based outside of St. Louis. We believe in impacting content knowledge of educators in order to impact the instruction, the student achievement. That's really the foundation of everything that we do. We believe the core of all of the work that we do is around relationships. So we believe in building strong relationships and then using evidence and research-based practices to impact student achievement. So just a little bit about us as we go through today, just so if you haven't heard of us, we wanted you to hear a little bit about us. Couple of reminders, please keep your microphone on mute. And if you have questions, thoughts, ideas, throw those in the chat and Stephanie's going to keep an eye on those and we'll take care of that. So I'm going to give you just a second to see what our objectives are for today. So in this webinar, you will learn the exact steps that we at Compass PD took to unpack the Iowa academic math standards. We also did this in English language arts. You're going to learn, we wanted to go through, actually there's a reason why we wanted to set this up. We wanted to go through our process so that if for you as a district wanted to try this on your own, you can do that on your own. Sometimes people bring us in to do this work, and sometimes people want to purchase the comprehensive standards guide so they can get started using it in their instruction immediately. So we really feel like it's important for us to meet people at different levels and make sure that you walk away with what you need in the moment. So that's what we're going to start with, the exact steps that we took. Then we're going to move into how to identify the knowledge that students need for mastery on a standard, those math standards. We're going to talk about ways to use that unpacked information from the beginning to develop tools that you can use for formative assessment and for data collection. You can use it for data-driven instruction so that you can design learning experiences, whole group and small group for your students, and then so that you can evaluate your student work. So many people use some of the tools that we developed for standards-based grading, competency-based grading, those kinds of things. We'll talk with you. That's when Constance and Sherry, Dr. Lorton will be jumping in to talk about key insights that we learned during this unpacking process. And then we want to help you have a clear path to implementing these strategies so that you have success on these new Iowa academic math standards. So I want you to take just a second. You'll notice up on the screen that I have a waterfall, and I want you to think about which of these objectives are you most excited about. Don't do anything yet. Look at these objectives. Think about it for just a minute. Type it, but don't hit send or enter or return yet. And we're going to do it all together so we can kind of get an idea. This gives me data of where we need to spend more time on what people are looking for. So look at those. You can choose a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Everyone hit enter. Let's see what we end up with. Okay. Nice. Nice. Okay. Yay. Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone that's putting this in here. So this is helping us know where we need to spend that time um, in as we go through this process. All right. So because we believe in making sure everyone has the same common understanding, we're going to quickly go through some of these things. I realize that we have people that are experienced, that have been doing standards work for a really long time, but we also have people who are brand new. And so we like to make sure that here at Compass PD that all of us are speaking the same language. So let's just take a second, and I think it's really important for us to know that standards matter. But what is a standard? So when we spent a lot of time in different types of dictionaries over this process. I know our team will talk through that a lot. But when I think about a standard, we went to Merriam-Webster and then the Cambridge Dictionary, and you'll notice that they say a standard is a criterion. It's a rule for measuring success on something, right? Whether it can be a quantity or a weight or a value or the quality. So that was something that kind of stuck out to us. Okay, so we're thinking about standards, we're measuring the value, the extent at which students learned something. And I think this is important for us to all understand that not only in education, but we have standards in real life. Like I have a brother that's a plumber. And so he has a book of standards that he's supposed to follow in order to make sure that the job that he's doing is at the highest quality level for the people that he's serving. And I think that it's important as school districts for us to think about this because our standards are the expectation that's placed on each content area, on each grade level. And for us to have a really strong, it's important for us to have a strong foundation of that because it helps us prepare students for their next level of learning, right? That next level of learning readiness. Those of you that have dug into choosing priority standards and things, we spend a lot of time on next level readiness, where we have to know what do kids have to know, understand, be able to do in order to be successful the following year. And you'll hear that a lot when you hear Constance and Sherry talk, like if kids don't have this in math, they're really going to struggle in this area in math, right? So another reason that standards are important is we're held accountable to that, whether we like it or not. We're held accountable to whether our students are mastering the standards or not. It impacts our funding, our accreditation, and it impacts our community because it can impact our property values based on the rating of a school district. So why do we unpack standards? And this is the foundational work that we run into all the time in school districts. We work across the nation, thousands of teachers, and there's the unpacking of the standards is the foundational work of everything that we do. Everything. It's aligned with best practices. So unpacking standards helps us clarify the concepts, the skills, the vocabulary that students need to know, understand, and be able to do. And sometimes what we run into is that we don't even have that understanding as the adults. Like I sit down and unpack standards and I'm like, ooh, I don't even know what that means. And I've been studying impacting learning for 20 plus years. And I have to go back and reference materials and resources and researchers. Unpacking standards provides educators clarity on grade level and content area expectations. It helps us define key terms and phrases that we need to know and understand, and students need to know and understand so that we can guide their instruction. When we unpack standards, we develop a hierarchy of skills so we can see how it starts from the beginning of the standard to the mastery level, the end of the standard, how students will be assessed when they take the ISASP test. Of course, exams, those kinds of things. Guiding curriculum, unpacking standards guides curriculum writing and assessment development. We also use this information to support our MTSS and RTI and helps us identify resources to support the curriculum. Like, give me a thumbs up. Does this align with your thinking? Not really, like, not at all. Yes. Okay, great. Okay, so why did we unpack the Iowa academic standards? Well, long story short, I'm going to try to make it really short. We have really good friends that we work with in Iowa, and one of them is Webster City, Iowa. We work with the director of teaching and learning there. We've been there for 4 years, working with Jama Hissler. And over the last several years, they've been doing PLCs, trying to do their RTI, their MTSS, and impacting their student achievement. Something that was happening over and over was we saw that we didn't have the knowledge that was from the unpacking of the standards. So we were trying to develop assessments in-house. We were trying to do all of these things. And so we started unpacking standards with teachers. Well, if you've done that before, you know that takes a lot of time, like a lot of time. And it takes a lot of stress. It puts a lot of stress on your organization, especially if you don't have time set outside of the school day. It takes about 15, 16 days to unpack priority standards, full days to be able to do that work, right? And do it well. And so we just didn't have that. And so over the years, she's asked us, would you please do this and we'll pay you? And we said, no, we believe the people doing the work are the ones doing the learning. Well, finally, we just saw the stress on the organization, and it's difficult to move forward when you don't have this information. And so we agreed this year to do that. We unpacked all of the Common Core state standards. And what happened was you got new standards. So we had got those all done, and we found out that Iowa had brand new standards. And we really believe in serving, and we're from Missouri. Most of our teams from Missouri, and we understand that a lot of times publishers and products aren't geared toward us because we're a small state. We don't have enough people for them to invest the money and the time and the effort in knowing what we're held accountable to. And so we didn't feel like that was fair to the Webster City teachers. So we went back and started all over again and unpacked every single math standard, every single English language standard that's an Iowa academic standard, and started that process all over again because we felt like that was important for their teachers. So I'm going to move into our objectives now, letting you know the exact steps that Compass PD took to unpack the Iowa academic standards. Again, I want you to know this so that you know how you can do this work. So if you need to do it in a house, or people can bring us in to help them with that and facilitate that because we know there's a lot of emotion, or some districts are wanting to purchase those comprehensive standards guides. So we have 5 steps we'll talk through. Step 1, we unpack the standard. And some people unpack standards differently. So I want to share this with you. This is from Wiggins, McTighe, Stiggins, Flack. We have just a huge amount of research that we'd be happy to share this with you. But so when we unpack the standards, I want to show you what this looks like. When you unpack a standard, here are the steps that you go through. We wrote the standard and the major cluster. So you'll notice the cluster at the top and then each individual standard. You have like 500, just so you know. here. So we wrote the standard. You'll notice the Iowa Academic Standard. We read through that 2 to 3 times. You go through the process of highlighting verbs, underlining the verbs being like the learning, the skills that you want students to know or do. And then we underline the nouns, those concepts that we're going to be taught. We looked at the context and then we wrote each of those as a separate learning target. Okay, so you'll notice here how we wrote each one separately. This probably looks really familiar. Does this look familiar? And this is most of the time where people stop. And I'll tell you because I promise I have done this with thousands of teachers, and people get really mad because they're like, what am I supposed to do with this? Okay, so I was in a room with 75 other teachers when I was in the classroom. 75 of us were like doing this, and we're like, okay, yeah, now what? All I did was move things around, and now I have these 3 sentences out of one big standard. What am I supposed to do with this? And so we take it a step further. And this is based on 20 years in education, but 10 years being in curriculum and instruction that we've all worked through and done this. So when you look at this unpacked standard, you're seeing explicitly what the standard states. Okay. And this is something I need you right now to remember. This part explicitly what the standard states. We're going to take it farther. We identified all of the vocabulary terms and phrases within the standard that we needed common understanding of by teachers and by students, okay? So we took all the terms and phrases in every standard and we defined them. We sometimes, when we define them, we used multiple resources to support us in this. We used the Iowa Academic Standard Glossary, the Common Core Standard Glossary, other state standard glossaries, researchers, some college things. And so we pulled all of that in to help us define them. Sometimes these terms, or a lot of times, they'll change from kindergarten to 12th grade. So we highlighted inside our glossary that we created where the standard change or where the definition for that term changed and why. So if it's based on context or it's based on maybe a different expectation in a lower or a higher grade level, that is noted within the glossary. People love this. Our glossary is 71 pages long of all of the mathematical terms and phrases that are used within your Iowa academic standards. So that's the second thing we do. Then we did this. Remember how in step one, I just told you that we had explicitly what the standard stated? Explicitly those learning targets. A big gap that we notice is people are like, what am I supposed to do with this? And we sat down as a team, and we've been doing this for years, and said, what are the objectives for this standard? Let's really look at these targets and think about what do students need to know, understand, and be able to do that isn't stated in the standard anywhere. And this is hard. This is what takes so long through this process. So think about a driver's ed standard just for a second. I want you to put on your teaching. Anyone here taught a 16-year-old to drive? Like it is the worst time of your life. I've taught two and I'll never do it. Like I hope I never have to do it again. Please God, don't make me do it again. But when you're teaching them to drive and you're teaching them how to merge onto the interstate, there's actually a driver's ed standard that says students will be able to merge onto an interstate at 55 miles per hour. Okay? They're going to be able to merge into a lane on the interstate at 55 miles per hour. I forgot in the lane. When you look at that standard, nowhere does it tell you that you need to think about your mirrors and use your mirrors to help you to do that. Nowhere does it tell you that you need to think about the other vehicles around you and be aware of your surroundings. You need to understand that. You need to turn on your turn signal. You need to speed up your car to get to the same speed limit as the lane you're merging in. And so when people see that, they're like, oh my gosh, Well, our state can't write standards that have all of those things that you have to know, understand, and be able to do to actually get to that end expectation that we see in the standard. Okay. So as a team, we sat down and we were like, okay, for us to see this in math, what else for us to get this end product out of kids, us to them to be able to do this math problem, what else do they need to know, understand, and be able to do that we don't see in this standard? And we listed everything out. How do you do that? You go through and you do the problems again and again. You've taught it thousands of times again and again. You work with kids again and again, and you start to see. So when you look at this, you'll notice that we have implicit things that aren't explicitly stated in the standard. So in that, you'll see under the know, we have the vocabulary terms that students need to know and teachers need to know, and other declarative knowledge. We also talk about like, what else do they need to understand, those big things in order to do this well. Some of that conceptual learning, and then all of the things that they need to be able to do to get to the end of year mastery on this standard. So we took all of that information, all of that, and we put it in a hierarchy, easiest to hardest, like beginning to the end of being able to master the standard. Okay. And here's what we came up with. We created learning progressions. This is one of the things our teachers love the most. So a 1-star is kind of like early on in the process. This is the evidence that we should see. Okay. So this is a tool that we developed. So we unpacked all that standard. So you see all that we unpacked. And then we developed this tool. It has the standard at the top. We have a 1-star, a 2-star, 3-star. What you see are the evidence of the work and the thinking and the talking and the things that students are doing. We should see students doing this. And it helps us as teachers, you can see over here, design our learning experiences, develop our small groups, create responsive teaching. So in this, like in geometry, in 8th grade geometry, you can go to where geometry is taught that same concept grades earlier and see how it progresses. So you could look at it, if a student's struggling, you can look back at other ones that are done and know that they're going to align, right? So we use it to develop small groups and responsive teaching. We use it to give students feedback, to formatively assess. So if I'm in a classroom, I write kids' names down when I'm walking around in the class and watching them do this work. We use this to help focus on our PLCs. So this is the beginning level, the middle level, and toward the end. It's the step-by-step building blocks toward mastery of that standard. Our learning progressions have implicit and explicit evidence that students need to be doing. Students use these. So teachers use these. We use them in PLCs. We've had administrators that we've worked with that are using these as well. We use them in curriculum instruction, obviously, to write curriculum. And then assessment development, right? And then students use these. We work with students all the time. So we're using these in Webster City and in Charles City, Iowa, where students are self-assessing, they're setting goals, they can give feedback to their peers, like, I'm here and this is the next step for me. I need to still be able to do this. So I need to work on this part of the progression. And then finally, again, going back to all that foundational work from the earlier part, we developed proficiency scales. So proficiency scales are different than progressions. The progressions had implicit and explicit. The proficiency scales have just the explicit learning, those learning targets from page 1, step 1, only the words from the standard, okay? So mastery level is the 3. Students need to be able to, in order to demonstrate mastery, they need to be able to do all the things in the 2 and the 3, and they're proficient. So if you're doing standards grades grading or competency-based grading, you would see that. They need to know, demonstrate, and demonstrate the terms that are here. And there are basic processes that they need to have on automatic pilot that are happening time and time again. And so our districts love proficiency scales because it helps them with common grading practices, assessment practices, and helps them have parent conversations with their homeschool connection. So we took, again, I want to tell you again, we started with that step one, went through all those steps to be able to get through this for every single standard. So take just a second and looking at this, if you, John Hattie talks about effect size. So John Hattie's effect size, he's a very famous researcher. He's been in education 30 years, studies, he does meta studies on research and talks about that effect size of certain things that we do in education that impact learning for positive and negative. So if you see a 0.40 effect size, you'll notice right here, that's 1 year's worth of growth. If you see a 0.45 effect size, it's potential to accelerate more than a year of growth. But if you see a 0.62 effect size, that's considerable acceleration, well more than a year's worth of growth. So what Unpacking Standards does, and in this fashion, in this way, and what we did in our comprehensive standards guides is it increases teachers' expectations, a 0.58. Students can self-assess, 0.81. Clarity for teachers and students, 0.85. Outcome-based education, standards-based grading, 0.91. So I mean, like, look at this. Considerably accelerate. 0.95, high quality, targeted feedback. And then a 1.44, teacher collective efficacy. Huge, huge. So
Carrie, before we go on, because we're kind of at a point where we're going to jump into some things that are very math specific, right? So
yes.
You really did a wonderful job of explaining the entire step-by-step process that we go through from beginning to end to get to this end product that is really doing all of these things that Hattie says is a big deal to get the student learning impact. So being really clear on our standards, which is what step one is, having that common vocabulary, which is step two, and then moving into really clear objectives that can also help clarify student learning, give really good high quality feedback, and clarify expectations, which is also what step 4 and step 5 do, where we're creating those tools that are really like student facing and very assessment facing types of things. So it's really nice to hear all those steps that a district can go through if they want to do something on their own, or talk to us more about the information, how they can get that information from us. So that's the overall, but we're going to get into really specific information about just math. And our friend, Dr. Sherry Lorton, is going to kick us off with sharing about elementary. Welcome, Sherry.
Hi. So, when we looked at the new Iowa standards, some of the things that we noticed were that there was a shift in focus, a shift in coherence, and a shift in rigor. And we know that Iowa has indicated which standards are the most important and should consume the most of our time for both our students' learning and our teachers' instruction. The different focus areas are stated at the top of each standard page in our comprehensive standards guides. There is indications for conceptual understanding. So the standards call for that conceptual level of understanding in key concepts. So students have to be able to access concepts from several perspectives to see mathematics as more than just a set of mnemonics or discrete procedures. We know that they need procedural skill and fluency, which is the ability to apply procedures efficiently and flexibly and accurately. That includes basic facts, being able to do computation, and have procedural fluency. And there are critical end of grade level standards indicated in kindergarten through 8th grade, where that fluency should be expected by the end of the grade in order to ensure that they can continue to be successful in the future. And of course, the application. So students need to be able to use their mathematics flexibly for applications in problem solving in the real world, but also in content areas outside of mathematics. We see it a lot in science, but really in any content area, students may need to be able to use mathematics to make meaning of and access their content.
Another thing that Iowa changed was we know about the math practice standards for the Common Core, and Iowa bundled their standards. And as a math teacher, I noticed that a lot of these fit together, like you were putting the same ones together at the same time. And Iowa helped to do that for you. And so if you look on the right, those are all 8 of the math practice standards. But what they did was they put them into bundles. So they have the communication and reasoning bundle, which has standards 6 and 3 in it. And then the problem solving bundle has 1, 5, 7, and 8. And then they have the modeling and data analysis bundle. Notice how 5 is in 2 of them. Use appropriate tools strategically. So 5 is in 2 of the bundles. So keep that in mind, which as you're thinking like, hey, I probably need to stress that with my students. And then within the comprehensive standard guides, the bundles are represented in the basic processes. So we went through and made sure that if it said it's the communication reasoning bundle, that's indicated in the basic processes of each of the standards in the comprehensive standard guides.
Okay, so very specifically at the elementary level, we looked at how many standards have changed from the Common Core state standards, which you guys previously used in Iowa. And you can see that there are 89 total changes in the standards for K through 5. There's 10 completely new standards. Those are all in K through 2. Most changes to the standards were at the 4th grade level, but all grade levels did have some changes. And although many of them are not major, changes in wording, even if they're slight changes, can really impact how our students need to show their learning and how the standards need to be taught. The new standards that are in K through 2, there's a lot about counting backwards. There's some things about money and time, subitizing, which is understanding, how to be able to quickly see a number, especially if it's in a pattern like dice or dominoes, those types of things. The other thing Iowa, some of the changes that they made are clarifications or examples. So there may be an additional type of problem indicated that the students might expect to be able to answer based on that standard. And they also included types of algorithms that students should know. So those are some of the big things that changed from your previous standards.
So our middle school standards, well, how many of them were changed? Well, let's find out. Go ahead and click, yeah. And what kind of changes? So the kind of changes that they made were actionable or measurable. So for example, they changed from know to classify and explain, from understand to describe how, from know to apply. So they made the standards more actionable for you. And then the next thing that they did, they separate them into smaller chunks. So if there were several things in a standard, they separated them into smaller chunks, or they separated out to make, or they combined things to make more clarity in what a standard was. For example, if there was an A, B, and C, they might have combined those into the standard. And then the last thing that they did for what kind of changes were what is this? What is it actually asking? So they gave more examples to help clarify your clarify what the standard was actually asking. All right. So how many standards do you think changed? Well, 51 of them changed. So there were 51 changes. 15 were in 6th grade. 17 were in 7th grade, and 19 were in 8th grade. All of the 5 deleted ones were in 7th grade, and that was where I was talking about the clarification, where they combined they took like some ABCs and they combined it into the one standard above it to help clarify, because you would traditionally teach those concepts together. So they deleted the A, B's, and C's and then made the larger one into one. So that's middle school. High school, well, we had a lot of changes in high school. Lots of changes in high school. They added modeling to a lot of standards. So those of you who know about the modeling part of the Common Core standards, they added modeling. In fact, every single one of your statistics standards is now a modeling standard. Again, they're more actionable. There's more clarification to it. Almost all of the new ones are in the pre-calculus and calculus level, which are not from the Common Core standards. Some other things that they did, they split Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 into separate standards. So for example, they emphasized in Algebra 1, linear, quadratic, and exponential. And then when you get to Algebra 2, they're emphasizing polynomials, radicals, rationals, and logarithms. So they separated those out to kind of help make it easier to identify what to teach in each of those contents. And then it looks like they deleted a lot. Don't panic. They deleted the plus standards. So the plus standards are what they took out currently because they're plus standards. So keep that in mind. As you're moving from Algebra 2 to pre-calculus, the vectors and matrices were a big chunk that they took out because those were all in Common Core identified as plus standards. But as you're teaching the pre-calculus matrices and vectors, you're probably going to need to hit on like the basic skills for vectors and matrices.
Wow. Lots happening. Lots happening.
Yeah, that is
Thank
a
you.
lot.
Thank you.
I was just kind of thinking, oh my goodness. First I kind of thought high school, yikes, that's a lot of changes. But I do love when Constance tells us, please don't worry. So
Right.
makes me feel better.
We're going to be okay.
Yeah. So like a recap of some of that specific information for Iowa and your new standards, or some big takeaways that I have are that the standards are more actionable. They provide more clarification and examples to help guide teachers in their teaching. And also that the elementary, middle school teachers can feel a little more less stressed about the number of changes. However, high school, if you're going to have to really look at your curriculum to decide how those standards are divided based on a lot of those changes.
I think that the clarity piece in the high school is key because they split them into classes. There's a lot of clarity in where I should be teaching what.
So it could
Nice.
be helpful, even though there are that many changes. Those changes are actually helping
Helpful.
clarify and make it easier for teachers and curriculum writers, potentially. That's wonderful. So we've
Okay.
heard a lot about the process. We've heard a lot about the more specific ways that are the specific changes and application to Iowa's standards. And now we're going to get into how can the comprehensive standards guides really be used as a tool for teachers. What do they do
Mhm.
for teachers and education leaders in actual practice? And Dr. Carrie Hepburn is going to lead us through that. Welcome back, Carrie.
Oh, welcome. It's been so fun to spend time in this math world the past 6, 7 months where we're really digging into this and learning from our team. So our comprehensive standards guides are something that we're showing you. It's something, again, we just talked to you about the entire process you can do in your district. You can have help building this in your district. We would love to do that work with you. And we also have it already ready to be used immediately in your classroom, in your school, in curriculum department. So the comprehensive standards guides are a tool. They have every single English language arts and math standard thoroughly unpacked, just like what we shared with you. We have the explicit learning targets within there, all those terms and phrases. Uh, it, we have the vocabulary terms and phrases determined. Those are all defined and defined based on context and grade level. We have progressions of learning that we use with students. Most of the time we use those with students and in PLCs, in curriculum and instruction for designing learning. We have the proficiency scales for standards-based grading. We use those for designing benchmark kind of assessments. We use those when we're having parent communication. Our comprehensive standards guides are resource agnostic. They're based on your standards. You can use them with any resource. The comprehensive standards guides help bring that cohesiveness where we're all speaking that same language in the curriculum, instruction, assessment, and multi-tier support system in all of those departments, all of those areas across all of the grade levels and all of the schools that we serve in. So again, we have these right now ready for math. Some of the problems that this solves, if you're like, we do not have time to do this work, I will tell you that our team spent over 1,500 hours in math alone on Iowa, just on Iowa. So not on Common Core and on Iowa standards, 1,500 hours in math, K-12, right? So if you don't have time in your day or your work or your week, struggling with that standard language can be really confusing, and people need something that helps them understand what those terms and those phrases mean. And so the comprehensive standards guides support that. The hierarchy of skills people love, like if they notice that students aren't performing, they can go back in the progression or in when it was previously taught a lower level of that particular standard and see where kids are fitting in and then meet their needs right there. So it helps them assess and intervene. People say, I teach what the standard says, it's not working. No, because you saw that those objectives, all of that implicit learning that has to happen. If that's not happening and you just teach what the standard says explicitly, students will not master that standard and they're going to have gaps. We promise you. We never have time to get from unpacking to the actual tools, like the glossary, the proficiency scales, and the progressions. And then I have kids on grade that aren't on grade level. How am I supposed to help them? Well, that's where the learning progressions and the proficiency scales are helpful and beneficial. So we have multiple testimonials from school districts. St. Charles City Middle School, in their first year of doing this work with learning progressions, they had an increase of their ISS scores across the entire building. We did this in all content areas of 10%. And then year 2, Joe Taylor, their principal, FaceTimed me. I had just got done working out and he's FaceTiming me like, you're not going to believe what our scores are. Another school district said, we're just going to try this with one grade level. We just want to try this with one grade level. It was so impactful on their high stakes assessments. They're like, okay, this is district wide. Not going to do it. I used to do this when I was in curriculum and instruction. I had my title buildings were qualifying, 50% of their students were qualifying for reading interventions. Within 1 year of doing this work, we saw it decrease by 20%. to 30% of the kids. I just got a call the other day, well, what's today? Friday, Monday, from the Scuda Middle School District. We work in some military schools. They saw an increase of 21 to 23% on their IAR scores last year alone. So we want to thank you for giving us your time. I apologize, I'm a minute over right now. We really appreciate you and all the work that you're doing to serve in education. We wish you the absolute best. You want to hear more about this, if we can help you in any way, you can see the information to reach out to us at Compass PD, see the information to reach out to BK Ed, and we are going to be at the ICTM conference in a couple of weeks, and we'll be presenting. We'll have a Q&A session, and we'll have actually some of the comprehensive standards guides, like the unpacking of the standards, so you can actually hold them and see them and look what they look like. So thank you for everything. We wish you the absolute best. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.